Good evening and welcome to The Right Side. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this is the show where we talk about news and controversial topics from an admittedly conservative perspective. This evening, I'm joined by Richard Geno, who is one of the co-founders of the Conservative Forum. And tonight, we're going to learn a little bit about the history of the Conservative Forum and where it's come till now. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into things. Tell me a little bit about how the Conservative Forum got started or why it got started in the first place.
Okay. Back in the fall of 2003, you may be familiar with a group called townhall.com. And it's a group that sends out a daily newsletter of various articles from people like Thomas Sowell, Larry Elder, David Limbaugh, Star Parker. And they had sent out an email to all of the subscribers, this was in about October 2003, to ask them to create a meetup group. If you recall, there had been a fellow named Howard Dean was running for president, and he had meetups all over the country. And that was kind of the first ones. And so they said, why can't we have a conservative meetup group?
Right.
So they sent an email to us, and we decided on a place to go. And about 21 people showed up at Baker Square in Almaden Valley.
Was there any of that confusing, obscene screaming that Howard Dean became famous for, or was it a little lower key than that?
It was a lot lower key than that. When we got together, nobody knew each other. It was 21 people who were together for the first time, and we got a long table, and we sat down. And we were just excited to find that there were 20 other conservatives in Santa Clara County.
And so how did you find them? Was it town hall? Did they help facilitate that? Did you have to use smoke signals? What was it to let other conservatives know that there would be a secret media?
Well, they sent out an email saying, would you be interested in doing it? And then you responded by email saying yes or no. And then they gave multiple choice, like 4 or 5 locations where we could meet, and the location that got the most votes was where we met. Okay. And so that's what Baker Square was the first place we met. That was November 4th, 2003. Okay. And as I say, there were about 21 people. We sat down and we talked about 3 or 4 different issues that night. We were together about 90 minutes. We talked about the war in Iraq had just begun. The war on terrorism in general was going on, and the Second Amendment was a topic we talked about. We got through after about 90 minutes, and we all went home.
Okay, and so who else was there in the room with you, or are there any names that have stuck with the Conservative Forum that are still there today?
Yeah, that kind of leads us to the second meeting, because the second meeting was they did it again in November, and we met at the Vesuvios in Santa Clara, and there were about 25 of us. And about halfway through the meeting, one of our members stood up and said, you know, we ought to get organized. Instead of just showing up and then going home, we ought to get organized. And so about a half dozen of our group stayed afterwards, and we created a kind of an informal board. And what led to regular board meetings the following month, I became the president, and but there was no official board. It was just a group of people getting together as a steering committee. Okay. And a fellow named Jack Mallory was who both are still active, Jack and myself, 8.5 years later. Okay. And Jack became the person who would line up the programs eventually, and when we started having programs instead of just getting around and talk.
Right, and so you've grown this organization from something informal where you were just having discussions to something where you have monthly speakers and sometimes up to 500 people at the Portuguese Hall. Talk to me a little bit about how that growth happened and where you saw major jumps in attendance.
Yeah, each year we saw a pretty good increase. The first full year was 2004, and we started to have speakers during 2004. And what we had was our own internal people, because first of all, we had no money, and second of all, we didn't even have enough to pay for a location. So we went to IHOP on Stevens Creek in Santa Clara, and they allowed us to have a meeting room where they held about 40, 50 people without paying them in exchange for people buying dinner there. Mm-hmm. And so we started meeting, and the first 3 speakers were actually members of our group. We had a fellow named Jack Ward who talked about Agenda 21. And
all the way back then?
Back then, and that was the summer of 2004, and I had never heard of Agenda 21. And he brought up a whole issue of sustainability and all the buzz terms that were being thrown around. And then we had another guy talk about global warming. And I'd never heard the other side of the story. You know, it was always global warming we had it. It was Al Gore was famous for it. It was going to kill us if we didn't do something. Man-made global warming was definitely an issue. And he not only questioned whether man-made global warming was an issue, he questioned whether we even had global warming. And so it was kind of a different twist. And then we had a lady named Lydia Ortega, who is the professor at San Jose State, and she converted the typical socialist economics department at San Jose State into a free market system in about 10 years. And now it's all free market professors, and it's kind of unique for the Bay Area.
And this is very interesting to hear, because I haven't gotten into that part of the history of the Conservative Forum. I am typically try to be a regular attendee, but this history component is something I was unaware of. And what's more interesting to me is the fact that the topics have not evolved much, other than a lot more people are interested in these things as the word's getting out about the other side of the global warming argument. And for example, at that point, we're hearing that it's been 11 or 15 years or so since the global cooling trend started, right, and that it was being questioned back then. And for people who don't know, can you explain a little bit more about what Agenda 21 is?
Well, Agenda 21, of course, I know that a couple months ago you had Heather Goss, and she certainly knows a lot more about it than I do, but it's groups like Golden Bay Area Government and ABAG and all these different groups are trying to kind of go past the elected officials and orchestrate under the guise of saving the world, saving the earth, right, developing programs that are going to create what Heather refers to as stack and pack housing, and clustering everybody together and, right, having rail, transportation right,
hubs and such.
So as I say, I'm not an expert on that, but
well, the biggest concern for people is property rights, and this right, is an issue that's actually stretching across the political spectrum. You hear about Democrats against Agenda 21, and then you hear about other more conservative groups as well. But the bigger concern is about the threat of local and regional governments just really looking at someone's property not as their property, but that of the community as a whole, and using eminent domain and other things to just right, either devalue or destroy property value altogether. And it's some pretty scary stuff. Right. And so at that point, you went from IHOP, you said, to...
Well, we went to IHOP, and we were there for about a year, a little over a year, and finally we were getting outside speakers, which of course we couldn't pay because we still had no money. So in the spring of 2005, we decided to become our own entity. And instead of being Santa Clara County Townhall.com, we became the Conservative Forum. And we incorporated, we became a 501c3, we got insurance, we created an official board of directors, and we did all the stuff you need to do to become an entity.
And where were numbers at that point?
I would say in 2005 we were still about 50, 75. Okay. Each year we had some pretty good solid jumps. I'd say in 2004 we were getting probably 25 to 35 people, and by 2005 it was up to 50 to 75. Probably in 2006 we were consistently getting over 100. Okay. And then we moved to Santa Clara, the American Legion Hall, in 2005, and then we were there for 5 years. Okay. And we outgrew that place also, because the maximum they could hold was about 250 people, and by the spring of 2010, we were having 250 as a minimum crowd.
So something interesting happened between 2005 and 2010, and I'm curious about how it affected your numbers. That would be the election of President Obama.
Yeah, we always consider him our best recruiter. And it would just, of course, it led to the Tea Parties and some of these other events that occurred around that. And so, but we were just have consistent growth, 100, 150, 200, and then we were consistently getting over 200. We left and went to the Portuguese Hall in the spring of 2010. Mm-hmm. And since we've been there, which is now just about 2 years, we've averaged about 300 attendees per meeting.
And sometimes bursts up to...
Yeah, we've had about 4 or 5 meetings where we've had up to 400 to 500. Right. When we had Brian Sussman speak, and he had about 500, and Victor Davis Hanson spoke, we had about 500. Andrew Breitbart, unfortunately, sadly, we lost him just a couple weeks ago, but he came in October of this past year, and we had about 500 also.
Right.
And so we've had consistently between about 250 and 500 people over the last 2 years.
And so my question would be, how are you getting the word out? Because it's in Mountain View, and literally I've seen people come from all over the Bay Area, including far north and far south. How are they finding out about this opportunity to get together, hear these speakers, et
Well,
cetera?
we almost could go back to what I think kept the group going when we were small, and that is I'm a real strong emailer. And before we had constant contact and various sophisticated methods, I would just send a lot of emails and create discussions on issues, and that was kind of like a single-minded effort of mine. We had three kind of leaders back in the early days, and that was Jack Mallory, who lined up the programs once we started having out-of-group speakers, and then I was the promoter, and then a lady named Pam Stone created a venue committee, which was to get, that night when we have the meeting, we had to have a registration, a check-in, various things were going on, and more than meets the eye. We had to set up the podium, and we had to set up the speaker and the PA system and the whole thing. So Pam organized that and kept that going. Now we have a large committee that helps with that every time, volunteers. But it was just an effort on the part of myself, sending out lots of communications and keeping them active. In fact, unfortunately, in 2004, nationwide, most of the town hall groups dried up after the elections of 2004. And we actually kept on going, and not only got going, but went stronger and stronger every year.
Which is something to say, especially in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And so you've had a lot of speakers. Tell me about a few of your favorites and why they were your favorites.
Well, we've had really some great ones. David Horowitz, Brian Sussman, Daniel Pipes, who speaks on the Middle East, Sally Pipes, no relation, but Sally Pipes is an expert on health care and Obamacare. We've had Melanie Morgan, Ward Connerly, John Lott, who's an expert on the Second Amendment. Just on and on. We've had a who's who of great speakers over the last 5 or 6 years, and keeps getting better. And this year we're going to have another gangbuster program. But
which ones were you particularly drawn to?
Victor Davis Hanson spoke last spring, and he was just brilliant. He spoke for 1 hour without any notes and on in-depth, important topics, and just went on and on without any notes. It was just, I was very impressed. He was just very, very knowledgeable and just a brilliant guy. Andrew Breitbart, rest his soul, in October spoke. We presented him with the Conservative of the Year Award, which was our third such thing as Conservative of the Year. We present it whenever we feel we're able to or want to. Right. And we gave it to him in October, and he was dynamic, just full of energy, and probably the most courageous person I've ever met. Nothing stopped him. He's right in your face with the truth. Yes. And he's a nonstop on-fire guy all the time. Yeah. I enjoyed Star Parker. She's very entertaining, and she was one of the most humorous ones we had. She kept us off guard all the way through.
Great.
But there's been a lot of great speakers. I start naming people, you leave out people like Brian Sussman and Melanie Morgan and Ward Connerly, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so I know that the main programs are the speaking programs, but I know that you're also involved in a lot of other things that a lot of the members may not even be aware of, such as helping to fund this show, The Right Side. What other things are you working on that are of value to the conservative community? Okay,
well, one of the things we did in the spring of 2005, we met with the San Jose Mercury News. And we did this from the 3 months prior to that. One of our members kept track of all the letters to the editor for March, April, and May of 2005. We found that of the letters to the editor, it was 4-to-1 liberal to conservative. And we presented it to we actually met with both the news department and the editorial department. And the guy that was in charge of editorial at the time said that isn't right. He is an admitted liberal, but he said that was not the way it should be. They don't want to be 4-to-1. Maybe it should be 6-to-4, but not 4-to-1. And so then we had a fellow named Keith DeFilippis who organized a handful of our people who were good letter writers, and it grew from about 10 or 12 people up to about 100 people on his committee. and we started writing letters to the editor on various topics, whatever was current and whatever was on the mind of the person who wanted to write the letter. Well, to make a long story short, in the last 7 years, since the spring of '05, we have averaged probably 1.1 or 1.2 to 1 liberal to conservative. So it's almost, in fact, in many months it was even. It's been never been more than 1.2 more than since we started doing this. So it's really been a great thing, and it balances things out as much as we can. Now the news section is different. They use the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times for their stories, and we can't really control those, or they don't even totally control them.
Well, but this is also the thing from a lot of organizations that are out there. People are consuming information, but they don't. They may be angry, but they don't do anything about it. And so this is actually a scenario where you're moving them toward a level of activism,
right?
Which is interesting and a way that many people may not be aware of, that you're involved in the community. And
we also have a Campus Liberty movement, which is working with the college campuses and young Republicans.
Okay.
Even though we're not a Republican organization, it turns out that young Republicans are very conservative, and we work with them to encourage them any way we can.
Okay.
We also have a Constitution class, which has been very popular. We started about late summer of 2010, so it's been going on almost about a year and a half now. And a fellow named Ray Strong conducts this, and he's going right through the Constitution they meet monthly, and it's been a very popular class. We have anywhere from 40 to 50 people show up to this every month. Which is larger than your initial starting group for the forum as a whole. But I've also heard rave reviews from the level of discussion as well as just what people get out of the program. So any other programs that you... Well, we have plain old discussion groups where people want to get one-on-one or one-on-five and have debates and discussions on the issues. We've done that. And it's basically... try to be activists. We also, at our meetings, we have exhibitors. We probably have anywhere from 10 to 20 exhibitors every meeting, and we don't charge for that. And people are there to talk about their issues. Certain people running for Congress, certain people supporting their cause, whatever their cause may be. We have an active voter integrity program, where right now you've got a lot of dangers of fraudulent elections, and we're trying to, clean that up as much as we can, working with the boards of the voting. Well, and what's amazing is just talking about voter integrity and just hearing what's recently been discovered in Sheila Jackson Lee's district in Texas, and how the government is fighting against Texas from asking for IDs at the polling places, given that there's open fraud happening, is beyond my ability to understand. And I know that you also do a lot at the beginning of the meetings of giving people the opportunity to speak about specific causes for the month, etc. Anything else that you... Yeah, we have, as you mentioned, we usually have anywhere from 2 to 5 people give a cameo. We started doing this about 2 years ago when we had people running for election in 2000 for the 2010 election, and we had people come and talk about if they were running for Congress, or running for Assembly, running for State Senate, or Board of Education, or City Council. And if they were conservative, we would let them talk for 2 or 3 minutes and support their cause. So it gave them exposure, and some people, it gave them practice of stump speeches, if you will, where they had a little 2 to 3 minute elevator speech they had to give. One of the other things we've done is we've presented over the last, started in 2009, the Conservative of the Year award, and we've handed that out to 3 people. We haven't done it every year. We've done it only when we felt we wanted to give it to somebody. And in 2009, we gave it to Ward Connerly, and for his work with affirmative action, or opposing affirmative action. He's had tremendous success in several states around the country. And when we had him, he'd just finished winning a major campaign in Michigan, which did away with affirmative action. And of course, he was very active at the Regents of California, University of California, and when they did the same thing here in California. So even in so-called liberal states, he's had very good success in getting rid of the prejudicial affirmative action.
Okay.
And then in 2009, we gave award to Melanie Morgan for the work she did with the troops. And then in 2011, Andrew Breitbart.
Okay.
And he exposed Congressman Weiner and Acorn, and
Congressman Weiner exposed Congressman Weiner.
Yeah, right.
Not the not the other way around. Well, at this point, what we would like to do is just shift gears for a moment and actually have the official word from the Conservative Forum.
Okay.
So we're going to go ahead and cut to the.
Say, well, I say I'm a constitutional law attorney. And they say, oh, really? What kind of constitutional law attorney? I say, well, I'm the true kind. The kind of believe that the Constitution is what the Constitution says and what it was intended to say. Anything beyond that is tyranny and should not be allowed.
So it's come to this, my friends. You ready the second American Revolution against a ruling class that simply lectures but does not listen or defend the American people? It is government versus the people. Am I right? Look at the Electoral College example, right? A leftist popular challenge to states' rights. You think the founders weren't brilliant people? Did they not know what they were doing by carefully calibrating to get the small states and the big states to come together? Why does Wyoming get 2 senators in California? Actually, I'd rather have Wyoming's 2 senators.
And so that was the official word from the Conservative Forum. Just in the minute and a half or so we have left, tell us a little bit about who the upcoming speakers are in the coming months.
Okay. Well, the next 2 months we're going to have probably 2 of our most popular speakers coming back. In April, by the way, we meet the first Tuesday of every month at the Portuguese Hall, which is 432 Steerland Road, Mountain View. So it's right off of Shoreline Boulevard, not far from here.
Right.
And in April, we're going to have Brian Sussman, and he's got a new book out, and where he's going to be talking about climate change and the fraud and the hoax that it is. And then in May, we're going to have David Horowitz come back, and he spoke to us about 4 or 5 years ago now, and he's always a great speaker. This summer, we have Tom Tancredo. And then in the fall, we're going to have John Fund from the Wall Street Journal in October, or September, excuse me. And in October, we're going to have Jesse Lee Peterson from Southern California. And he's had a few run-ins with Jesse Jackson. So that should be interesting.
Okay, so it sounds like an action-packed next few months. Yeah. Tell us how we can find more information about the Conservative Forum.
Well, you can go to the website, and you can watch that video again. It's www.theconservativeforum.com. And it's filled with a lot of information. It's filled with 8 years of our speakers, We've had over 84 different talks over the years, and you can go see a summary of each one of them. And it's a great website. We just revised our website about 3 or 4 months ago, and it's just first class.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing this evening, as well as for helping to underwrite the right side. We appreciate it, Richard.
It's our pleasure.
Thanks. And in the last couple of minutes that we have for the show as a whole, I wanted to cover something that I heard this weekend that scared the bejeebers out of me. I'd recently heard about H.R. 107, House Resolution 107, coming up in the House of Representatives, and there's a move now to get this resolution out in the open about the possibility of Barack Obama being impeached if he goes into another war without the authorization of Congress, which constitutionally is a requirement if we are looking at going into war as a country. My concern came not just from that, and impeachment is something that definitely should be taken seriously, but what I heard, this was in a town hall meeting type of setting, I heard one of the participants saying, well, Obama didn't need congressional authorization because he got the authorization from the United Nations and NATO. This scares me out of my mind because what it represents is a scenario where, in this case, the woman was probably around 60 years old. We've lost complete understanding of what the Constitution is, what it provides as leeway versus disallows the executive branch and the president specifically from doing on his own. The United Nations has no authority to declare war and bring us into it, nor does it have the ability to use our soldiers as a peacekeeping army around the globe. And if people are this misinformed and are taking this from the mainstream media that it's okay because NATO and the United Nations say so, we're in a world of hurt as a country. A recommendation that I would have is if people are close by enough to Mountain View that they actually come and participate in the Constitution classes that Richard Geno just mentioned at the Conservative Forum. On that note, a rather serious note, I do want to thank you for joining us this evening on The Right Side, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.